welcome to Free Speech TV. My name is Nagin. I'm here at the 2018 Bioneers Conference, and we are very honored to have one of the plenary speakers here with us today, a woman who is a mover and shaker in changing medicine here in the Bay Area and at Standing Rock. Her name is Rupa Marya. She is an associate professor of medicine at UC San Francisco, which is one of our leading research hospitals and universities here in the Bay Area. And she is also a founder of Do No Harm Coalition, which is a 450 strong group of healthcare workers and students who are dedicated to ending racism and violence in our society. Why is a doctor interested in that? Well, one of the amazing things that Rupa is involved with is really changing our discourse around medicine and viewing violence and racism as a public health problem. She's a mother and an amazing musician and vocalist, and if we're lucky, we're going to get a chance to hear her sing. Singing is healing. Welcome, Rupa, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Phil.
So I want to ask you a little bit about this reframing of medicine and healthcare that you're doing, the work that you're doing around helping us to see violence and racism as a public health problem. What does that come from in your work, and why is this so important?
For me, it's more looking at racism and state violence. So we can look at health disparities in our society through, traditionally, public health has looked at difference in health disparity by race. So Black and brown people in this society have worse health outcomes kind of across the board, whether it's cardiovascular disease. The killers that are killing the American population are killing more efficiently the Black and brown people. And so people will look at it based on socioeconomics, based on race. Maybe these things are overlapping, but we can also start to look at it through the lens of the structural lens of racism. Like, how is racism impacting that? And so for me, what happened in San Francisco in particular is that I started noticing that people in my community were being shot by the police, and those were Black and brown members of my community. This was happening in parallel with more and more people of a lot of privilege moving into San Francisco, causing evictions of Black and brown people in San Francisco. The whole culture of San Francisco has changed because of this onslaught of capital, of money, and of people wanting to live in San Francisco, many of them who didn't work in San Francisco, and displacing a whole group of people.
So this is part of the tech boom, and it's part of the gentrification,
yes,
of areas like the Mission.
The Mission, right. And so I noticed when Marya was killed in 2015. I noticed when Alex Nieto was shot, I think it was 59 times by bullets on Bernal Hill, where he was eating a burrito. A young man who was born and raised in San Francisco, was perceived to be strange and acting abnormally by two newcomers, two white men who were walking and saw him and called the police. And within 2 minutes, they were raining bullets into this poor young man. So I started to see this behavior from the police. Then there was an onslaught of racist text messages between police officers in the San Francisco Police Department, and started to witness how it was eroding the civic trust in the city. Many things were eroding that civic trust, but that most egregious experience of state violence towards people who are predominantly poor, mentally ill, or Black and brown was very concerning to me, because these were our patients.
But they're also typically a population that does not have access to good health care. Is that also?
Right. Yes, there are barriers to access to care. And also, UCSF is one of the largest employers in San Francisco. And so one of my concerns is, eventually this is going to touch someone in our community, someone who works in the staff of UCSF. It's part of this is our community that was being affected. And so as I was driving to work one day, I saw people sitting outside of the Mission Police Department. There were 5 people announcing that they were going on hunger strike until there was justice for those who had been recently shot by police. So now, out of the over 45 killings by SFPD in the last 20 years, exactly 0 police officers have been found guilty of any wrongdoing. And then that whole process of how the DA charges or doesn't charge, or how that's investigated is not transparent, and it's obfuscated, so people can't really find out how to hold police accountable. And so I was starting to see the layers of distrust, the erosion of civic trust, and the impact of trauma on the communities who were there and still trying to hold on. So not only was there this economic violence of gentrification, but then there was this state violence making people feel unsafe in the communities where they had grown up. And so I started to look at that framing. So when I saw these people on this hunger strike, I thought, okay, if they're there in 3 days, I'm going to go and introduce myself. And so they were there, and I walked up and I said, okay, I'm a doctor, I'm also a musician, and two of the hunger strikers were musicians, and they knew me from the music community. And so I said, I'm a doctor, I work at this free clinic for undocumented migrants down the street. If you all need help during your strike, I offer to accompany you and make sure that you're safe. And they, because I was a musician, they trusted me. They're like, oh, I played in Golden Gate Park with you back in 2009. Like, I remember you, remember Power to the Peaceful? I'm like, oh, I remember. And so there was this trust and sense of camaraderie. And we brought them into this free clinic and basically worked with the students of San Francisco State and the UCSF medical students on helping to understand what the role of the body is when the body becomes an active political activity, and then what the role of the physician becomes in accompanying bodies that are in the struggle for dignity and health for their community. So what is our role in that? And it became a very powerful question. And so that experience, after those hunger strikers quit their strike, the police chief resigned, and they're still struggling for justice for their family members. We met with the family, people fighting for justice for Marya Woods, who was killed, 26 years old, killed 20 bullets by the San Francisco Police Department. We asked, what can we do now? And they said, make a study and show what is happening to our community when we have these police killings, and the medicine for this wound that we feel is justice, and the justice is withheld from us.
Is this the justice study that you're working on? Tell me briefly about that.
Yeah, and so then we got together a team of researchers, and we thought, how do we methodologically ask that question? And how do we demonstrate all the areas of life that are impacted by this kind of violence, so that we can see what we already know is that communities are traumatized, and they're traumatized not just by the police killing, but then their sense of fear of the police, a sense of being surveyed by the police, and all these things have downstream health effects, whether it's through trauma, anxiety, depression. They all have far-reaching health effects.
Medical effects.
Exactly. So I think that there's the incident itself, and then there's all the ripple effects. So what we're trying to understand is, how pervasive are these ripple effects?
But there have been, as I understand it, studies that were done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente on the impact of traumatic environment on young children, brain development. There, as I understand the conclusions of that study, the life expectancy is 20 years less if you have 3 or more of these kinds of incidents. So these are young children, has to do with brain formation, all kinds of things. Could you talk about that?
Right, so if in these communities you're growing up and you're seeing someone shot on the street who looks just like you, or you hear of someone shot and you can easily go online and find that video and see it, or you're in your community and you hear of this happening, this is traumatic for children. And so those adverse childhood events that people are exposed to, the more you have of those in your life, the more likely you are to have cardiovascular disease, poor life functioning, poor relationships, depression, suicidality. Like, these are the things that, these diseases that are part of our culture at large become more concentrated and intense in people who have these experiences in childhood. So we're looking at it from that perspective. We're not actually particularly looking at children, but we believe that those effects of trauma are also impacting adults. And from the preliminary results we've seen, they are. And it's
enormously.
Yes.
And yet this is not a generally accepted piece of medical school training, or the medical establishment has not really fully grasped this yet. I want to ask, in the hospital where you work, UCSF, which is one of the premier research hospitals in the country, is the culture changing there? Do you find that there's either around gender and doctors and having more female surgeons? How is it changing there?
Yeah, the culture is changing. It's interesting. Now we're starting to learn and have a language around structural issues causing health problems. And I think it's interesting. I had a colleague who's a nephrologist, and an older guy in his late 50s who had this African-American patient who was on my service, and he had been trying to get her a PET scan for her cancer for months. And he called me, and we usually don't do PET scans when people are in the hospital. He says, "Rupa, can you get me this PET scan? I've been trying to get this for months." And I said, "Yeah, why hasn't she gotten a PET scan? She needs a PET scan." He's like, "Well, we just have to get this PET scan." And then he said, "You know what? I really think it's systemic racism. I think that's why she hasn't gotten the PET scan." So I was like, "Oh, interesting." So this is like this older doc who's using this language. So all I did was call down to nuclear medicine. I said, "This Dr. Marya, I need a PET scan. We're not going to do it in the hospital." They replied. I'm like, "Well, you know, this doc thinks it's systemic racism, why this woman's not getting it." And it was done within like a few hours. They're like, "Okay, we'll get right back on that," right? And so I was like, "Well, can we use this word now that when we use this phrase, now that we have, you know, evidence behind it, now that we have the ability to talk about it?" So even older doctors who weren't raised with this language are starting to understand these connections.
Is that because there are more women who are medical doctors in the hospital? What is it?
I think it's partly a cultural shift. It's women, it's minorities, it's young, the vocal, the outspokenness of the young medical students now. They're not young, but they're the new medical students. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It kind of reminds me of the Parkland students. Like, these young students are so awakened politically, and by politically I mean to power dynamics that are creating health disparity. And they have a language that they are using on a day-to-day and a framing of disease that is so refreshing. And it's stuff that I've been talking about for a while, and I haven't seen, you know, people pick it up. And now these young people are coming and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is this, this is this." And so I think their presence and the presence of more people of color and women is really changing the dynamic of what's happening.
That's wonderful, Rupa. But you talk about this period in our civilization as an era of inflammation, which is an interesting phrase, an interesting choice of
those aren't that's not my conceptualization.
Okay.
So this is there was, I think in 2004, a Time cover magazine that was the secret killer, inflammation. So it was all about how
stress
with the discovery of the RAS gene mutation in colon cancer, they showed how chronic inflammation in the colon causes this mutation, which can then lead to downstream to cancer. So instead of just focusing on the cancer, why aren't we focusing on the conditions that are causing inflammation? And if we look at, I think, for me as a woman who's married to a farmer, when I look at the microbiology data from the soil that he's studying, I'm like, this looks like inflamed soil. Like, if we think of the gut, and we go, okay, here's an inflamed gut, this is what the microbiology of the gut is. The soil an actual metaphoric and actually true manifestation of what our gut is like? And if the food that we eat is coming from this inflamed soil, how is it inflaming our gut? And so how are these things connected? And so it's not just, I talked today about inflammation secondary to trauma and chronic stress, which is a known quantity. But I also wonder if we zoom out a little bit more and look at even earth practices that are damaging and not holistic, that if they're creating a setup for more disease.
So you've got a connectivity. This is so appropriate to Bioneers, between the soil, the earth, healing from the heart of the earth, to social conditions, to our physical conditions, and that it's
all related.
It's all interconnected. It's all interrelated.
And it's all destroyed by the economic systems that put us out of balance. And the one that we have right now, extractive capitalism, or any extractive phenomenon that doesn't reintegrate us into balance with natural systems, is going to have the same outcome.
The same outcome.
Yeah.
So is it possible to be healthy in this era of inflammation, that is where the disease is so, it's in every system, without changing the economic system?
No, I don't think it's possible. And that's why I think like doctors are really struggling, because the rates of diabetes, you look at groups of people that have been recently colonized, and that system of economics is brought into their reality. You see the same disease profiles increase within 10 years. So the diabetes goes through the roof, the cardiovascular disease goes through the roof. These diseases are part and parcel of this structure. So wherever the structure goes, you'll find these diseases.
As a result.
Right. And so I think that we actually need structural change to ultimately deal with the diseases. Not saying we won't have new diseases, we can't live forever, but there is a particular quality of inflammation that is a part of all of these diseases that I think is important to start looking at what is causing that.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about your work at Standing Rock?
So Standing Rock was an amazing place to see how colonization is ongoing, what genocide looks like towards Native people, which is ongoing, and how the fossil fuel economy interacts with local and federal governments, as well as private military contractors who were out there. So that experience, it was almost like seeing what's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan right in home. When I was there and a young Native Cree boy coughed up a cup of blood into his hand, which is quite a dangerous amount of blood, after being shot at close range by a rubber bullet. There was a line of white police, I don't even know if they were police, they were armed security, shooting at close range, mostly into the faces and the groins of young, bare-chested indigenous boys who were praying in the water. I was standing next to a grandmother who was crying and just said, how long do I have to see Native bodies being brutalized by white colonizing forces? How long do I have to witness this? And hearing that in her voice, and that is trauma right there. And that trauma is reawakening the whole legacy of trauma that has become encoded in the genetics of the people. So the epigenetics of Wounded Knee and those massacres are part of people's reality and their lived experience. And so at Standing Rock, I was working with the Medic Healer Council. I was working with the doctors there, the Lakota doctors and tribal members, to help deliver urgent care in the camps. And then now we are working on creating a clinic, a long-standing clinic for decolonizing medicine. So as we started to see, people's illness, what the story that never left Standing Rock, never made the news, was the young Native person that commits suicide that week that I was there. And every time I was there was a young 15 to 20-year-old Native person who commits suicide. So suicide in Native Americans, the rate is up to 5 times the rate of other people.
Is it the highest of?
Yes, Native Americans. And so that reality made us start to think, okay, so how can we create a model that will help heal the people from this experience of colonial trauma? And so that is what we're developing right now, is a clinic called the Miniwichoni Clinic. And as we interviewed elders and asked them, what does medicine mean to you? What does health mean to you? What does decolonizing medicine mean? They all said we can't decolonize our medicine without decolonizing our food. And we know what's making us sick, and it's this colonial mentality of how we get our food and how we're in relationship to these things. So they said we can't decolonize without decolonizing our diet, and that's when we decided to have a farm be an integral part of the clinic. So the great-grandson of Black Elk Medicine Man, who wrote Black Elk Speaks. So he will be the farmer, the permacultural designer and farmer of the farm around the clinic.
This is extraordinary. I mean, this is exactly the model that you're saying is lacking in
Right.
our...
Right, and so there's a part where it's like we have to start now with creating the realities, of creating the alternate visions, and that's the thing is when when we talk about critiques of capitalism and critiques of these economic systems, we can talk about overthrowing them, or we can talk about just building alternative economies that are just so much better, and they're better in a felt way that people just won't see a need for something that, it'll just become obsolete. So that's what we're hoping to do.
Rupa, Marya, thank you so much for being with us. I want to end with something positive. Rupa is an incredible singer. I got to hear her sing today, and I wonder if you would be willing to, even a short verse from one of your songs.
I can sing you.
The band, by the way, is called Rupa and the April Fishes.
Yes.
CDs out there?
Lots of CDs.
Oh, good.
There's another one coming. So we're making a new album called Growing Upward, which is based on a lot of these experiences with communities that I've been working with. And this song is a song that I was asked to write by the grannies at Standing Rock, who said, give us some music that can make us feel encouraged when we're standing there on the front line, putting our bodies in the way of these pipelines, getting showered with these rubber bullets. They said eating rubber bullets for breakfast, like we do, and these powerful women. And so I was like, okay, let me write them a song. So I wrote a song about what the police are actually there for. Who are they to serve and protect? It's like, we're here to serve and protect. Well, who are we here to serve and protect? So that's what I'll sing about, okay? Is that cool? So here we go. Without my guitar, here we go. You serve and protect the pipeline. You serve and protect the bottom line. Serve and protect the coal mine. Serving up grenades to grannies standing on the front line. Serve and protect the rancor. You serve and protect that oil tanker. Serve and protect the bankers. Serving up the people with eviction papers. You better recognize who we are. We are the ones who are rising with the water. We are the great, great, great grandchildren of the ones they couldn't kill, yeah. We are the sons and daughters of the earth who you don't protect because you serve and protect the rancor. You serve and protect that oil tanker. Serve and protect the banker. You're serving up the people with eviction papers. Serve and protect the pipeline. You serve and protect the bottom line. Serve and protect the coal mine while we stand here, still standing strong everywhere on the front line.
Rupa, Marya, thank you so much.
Yay.